Gill, Revelation chapter 3, verse 7. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, of the city of Philadelphia, see my notes from Revelation chapter 1, verse 11. According to the Apostolical Constitution, one Demetrius was ordained bishop of this church by the Apostle John, but this is not to be depended on, nor is it known who this angel was. However, certain it is there was a church in this place in the 2nd century in the times of Ignatius, who wrote an epistle to it, and which then had a bishop or pastor over it, when he mentions, though not his name. And in the same century, 12 Philadelphians suffered martyrdom at the same time Polycarp did. And in the 3rd century, a church remained in this place, and also in the 4th, since a bishop of this church was in the Council of Nice. And in the 5th century, a presbyter of Philadelphia was in the synod at Ephesus under Celestine. And in the 6th century, a bishop of this place assisted at the 5th synod at Constantinople. And in the 8th century, Stephen, bishop of the church here, was in the Nicene synod. And there are now very many that bear the name of Christians of the Greek church in this place. This church is an emblem of and represents the church in that period of time in which will be the spiritual reign of Christ. Its name signifies brotherly love, which in this interval will be very remarkable. Saints shall not envy, vex, and distress one another any more. They shall be one in the hand of the Lord and among themselves. Love, which is now so cold and so much wanting in our present Sardine church state, will be exceedingly warm and fervent in its highest pitch in the Philadelphian state. The characters Christ here assumes point at the holiness of life, truth of doctrine, and purity of discipline, for which this church state will be distinguished. In this period of time, an open door for the gospel will be set. It will be preached in its power and purity, and will be greatly succeeded. The fullness of the Gentiles will be brought in, and the Jews will be converted. Hypocrites and former professors will be discerned and detected. Great honor and respect will be shown the church by all men, and this state will be an emblem and pledge of the New Jerusalem state, of which mention is made in this epistle, or the 1,000 years personal reign of Christ with all his saints. These things saith he that is holy, which character not only agrees with Christ as God, who is the Holy One of Israel, and equally glorious in holiness as his Father, but as man. His nature was free from original sin, his life from any actual transgression. His doctrines were pure and holy, and so were all his works and all his administrations in each of his offices. And as mediator, he is the cause and author of holiness to his people. They are sanctified in him, and have their sanctification from him, and are sanctified by him. This character he chooses now to take, because he was setting an epistle to such as were lovers of holiness, and famous for it, both internal and external, so that while he describes himself, he points at persons, the members of the churches in this interval. He that is true, truly God and truly man, true and faithful in the discharge of his several offices, and in the trust reposed in him, both of the grace and persons of the saints, and in what he undertook to do for them. He is truth itself, the truth of types, promises, and prophecies, and the sum and substance of all truths of the gospel, and is therefore to be depended on in every prediction and promise. And this title of Christ may have some view to the truth of the doctrine which shall in this period prevail, and to the faithfulness and integrity of his people to his cause and interest. He that hath the key of David. Mention is made of David because he was a type of Christ, and because from him Christ came according to the flesh, and whose throne he was to set upon in a spiritual sense, and because in this period of time the Jews are to be converted, who will seek the Lord their God and David their king. And by the key of David is meant the key of the house of David, that is, the church of Christ, of which David's house and family were a type, and this key is either the key of knowledge or it is expressive of power and authority. Christ has the key of knowledge. He knows all the persons of his people, all their affairs, and what they do in his house, and how they behave there. He has the key of knowledge in the scriptures and gives it to his ministers. And it may also design his authority in his house and church, in fixing the ordinances of it, and bestowing gifts of men, and in dispensing the blessings of grace and goodness. This may have some regard to the pure discipline of this church, as well as its light and knowledge in the doctrines of the gospel. The Targum on Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22, interprets the key of the house of David, the dominion or government of the house of David. He that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. He opens the scriptures which are shut to a natural man, as he did in his own personal ministry, when here on earth and now by his Spirit, and none can shut them, either men or devils, or hinder the spread of light and knowledge by them. He opens the door of the gospel and gives an opportunity to preach it, and liberty of mind and expression to his ministers, and a door of utterancy to them, and of entrance for it into the hearts of men, which none can shut nor hinder. He opens the door of the church, which is himself, and lets in his sheep into his sheepfold, into a gospel church state, and ordinances of it. And he opens the door of heaven by his blood and righteousness, and gives his people liberty and boldness to enter into the holiest of all, and brings many sons to glory, in spite of all the opposition of men and devils. On the other hand, when he pleases, he shuts up the scriptures and the eyes of men from seeing what is in them. He shuts up the door of the gospel and forbids the preaching of it in this and that place, and the door of heaven will be shut by him at the last day, when all called to the marriage of the Lamb are entered, and there will be no opening. This shows the sovereignty, power, and authority of Christ, and which he will exercise in this church state. See Job chapter 12, verse 14. The like phrase is in the Talmud. When he shuts again, there none that opens. Unquote. And in Revelation chapter 3, verse 7.